ready. Now, my name is Matthew Schell. I'm Capsim's Market Development Manager, where I assist with a variety of the different academic and corporate authors that actually create the very micro simulations that you're going to experience today. Now, we have some great sessions ahead of you today, and you're going to see everything from actually going through one of our CapsimInbox microsims to learning about how you can actually create your very own CapsimInbox versions. But what I'd like to do now is actually introduce you to the main speaker for today's sessions, Dr. Eric Deardorff. Now, Dr. Eric Deardorff is a professor of management in the Driehaus College of Business at DePaul University. And inside the university, he's an award-winning instructor at both the graduate and undergraduate levels of business education. And outside the university, Dr. Deardorff has helped a wide variety of organizations to more effectively leverage their human capital through overall process designs, individual development and coaching, and evidence-based interventions using data science and analytics. And he's going to take you through the agenda for today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Eric Deardorff.
Hey, good morning, everyone. You can hear and see me okay, I assume? Nice. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it. We'll try to keep it going at a decent pace to keep you engaged throughout the session this morning, to train the trainer, if you will. So you can see the agenda up here. We'll stick to it as closely as possible. I'll take you all the way up through to the last two topics, and then I'll pass it over to Matt to talk a little bit about the platform and creating your own inbox if that's what you're interested in. So, the grand scheme of things, like sort of the purpose of the workshop, is we designed this around to have a lot of room for questions and discussions, especially for topics after the break. After we take the break, there's a little bit more room, but we'll try to sort of adhere to it. And I've put in sort of these periods where I ask, I stop and wait to see if there's any questions. But along the way, if you think of something and you don't want to forget it, just type it into the chat. We can always circle back and address it there too. For those of you that have used CapsimInbox before, you will see some similar material here, some familiar material, but I can promise you'll still learn new things too. There's a lot of other kinds of new interesting information to help you utilize it even more effectively. Part of this idea, even if you're familiar with the tool, is that if you develop a deeper understanding of the design philosophy and the science behind this product, this tool, it'll help you administer the tool more effectively in your own courses, whether they're in an academic environment or a corporate environment. I know we have people from both worlds. Some play in both worlds as well, corporate and academic. So, but a lot of my examples will be academic because that's the majority of the folks that are on today. But just think of it when I say course, think of it as like a training course, right? And obviously it can be delivered in person or online. The things I'm talking about today are flexible, right? These are principles and tactics that apply across the board, no matter the medium through which you're choosing to deliver the training. And so you can kind of see the broad agenda that we'll stick with. A little bit of background up front about what this thing is, where did it come from, the origin story, if you will. Then we'll actually take a test drive. I'll do throughout the talk today, I'm going to demonstrate effective ways of kicking off and debriefing tools. So you can actually see what it looks like, regardless of the version of Inbox that you use, you can see what it looks like to effectively set one up and debrief it. So I'll actually run through ones that I use. But in between, you'll actually get to play with one. We're going to pick time management, that version, which I'll talk about a little later. But essentially, it shows a lot of the different kinds of features that are available in a lot of these different versions of Inbox, right? And it's shorter. So you'll be able a chance to get in there and try to see what it's like and take one, right? And participate in one. And then we'll return back and talk a little bit about, well, how do you debrief this? How would you actually implement it in your organization, your institution? There's a lot of different ways of doing it, okay? Again, if you have questions along the way, just feel free to type them in chat. There's definitely a bunch of breakpoints in here to circle back and answer questions. Okay, so let's just jump right in. So we think of this idea of the origin story. What in the world is CapsimInbox, right? Essentially, it's what we would call a micro simulation. And more specifically, it's a micro simulation platform. It's an actual platform, an application that you could build multiple versions of the micro simulation. And if you want to think about the definition of a micro simulation, most of you are probably familiar with traditional simulations, right? These broader business simulations, strategy simulations that last multiple weeks oftentimes. Capsim products,
Sure.
Capstone Foundation, Capsim Core. Someone have a question? Okay, thanks. But a micro simulation is similar to a business simulation, a broader simulation. It's an experiential learning tool. It puts participants within an artificial environment, a simulated environment, simulacra. But it's designed to elicit the specific skilled application of very discrete knowledges or very discrete competency areas. So it's a lot more focused, a lot more concise than a typical simulation, traditional simulation that you might use for teaching, for training, okay? These often can be completed in 30 minutes or so, right? They're designed to be much more concise and focused on a smaller set of competencies. And so why use micro simulations, or why sort of integrate them into your training, into your courses? Well, as I mentioned before, they're bite-sized. Most of them can be completed between 30 and 90 minutes, even the versions that Capsim has. We usually ask people to try to, or encourage them, I do, as well as the Capsim folks, to design them for under or less than an hour experience. Sometimes they can take a little longer, but a lot of the ones that I use, it ranges between about 20 minutes to 38 to 40 minutes to completion, right? So definitely bite-sized. It's really flexible. Because it's an online application, it can be delivered online. You can use it in multiple ways as a teaching tool, as an example tool, as an assessment tool for accreditation purposes, or competency tracking and things like that in organizations. Like normal simulations, it has the benefit of authenticity or fidelity, we might call it. The look and feel of it feels like the tools that you would use in real life. The scenarios that are presented have that real life fidelity aspect to it, which is the benefit of simulation-based learning anyway, right? It's also self-directed. So you'll see it towards the end after we talk about how to implement the various ways you can implement Inbox. There are a lot of different ways you can roll this out, ranging from totally hands-on, guiding the entire process, to totally hands-off, where you just barely have a little bit of a kickoff, maybe even record it, and you let people go through it completely self-directed. So that's the beauty of the platform. It has a variety of ways to implement it, and it can be totally self-directed. That's the way it's designed, in case you want to use it that way. And then finally, it's developmental in nature, right? There's the training, there's the learning. It's not just about assessing things, it's about giving information that allows for further development, and it provides immediate and actionable feedback. All the versions do this, so they provide it in various ways, and we'll get a chance to see what this looks like. So a couple things. Some of you might have used some of the simulations, micro simulations that Capsim has. Others, you might have just browsed the catalog, if you will. A couple quick things. There are two broad types of CapsimInbox versions, right? Regardless of the topical focus. The first type really emphasizes sort of what I would call assessment and development, right? So you can see these on the left. They tap into generalized skills that cut across industries, cut across different roles, communication, problem solving, initiative, these sorts of things, leadership. And when I say assessment and development, the feedback that students get, that participants get from their experience is in the form of objective percentile scores, right? So their skill scores will be percentile based, normed to the population database that Capsim has. And so the development of this type of CapsimInbox on the left there followed your traditional conventional test construction procedures, right? Where they're driving empirical evidence to establish the various forms of validity. So content related validity, criterion, construct, and so forth, reliability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea here again is focus on sort of assessing and then using it for developmental purposes. The second type on the right, I would sort of characterize more as pure instruction. It's akin to a really in-depth, immersive, interactive case study, if you want to think of it that way. So the feedback that students typically get, participants get when they go through these versions, still developmental, but it's more, they won't get percentile scores. They're not normed scores. They're usually in the form of percentage of points earned, right? So you got 80% of these correct. So it still provides that feedback, but not necessarily normed to the population. Okay. And so both types of these inboxes can be used for teaching, right, for training, as well as learning assessment and accreditation documentation for those of you in the university environment, right? We always have to bring to bear accreditation information. But that's kind of the broad differences, the types of sort of skills that are focused, much more generalizable, not as specific of a topic as you see on the right side for those that are on the left. But also the feedback is slightly different. Norm to the population, percentile based versus kind of percentage based. How many did you get correct and so forth. Okay, so let's take a brief look at the tool for those of you who haven't seen it before. I'm just going to walk you through some screenshots. Most of the versions follow the same kind of flow and the same look and feel. I'll show you snapshots of a couple particular ones, but it really doesn't matter which one you pick. They have kind of this general interface that we'll talk about in a second. And Anita, I see your question about why the word inbox. We'll talk about that in a second. Essentially, it's this idea of, as you'll see in a moment, information coming into your inbox. These used to be called in-basket exercises when you would do those in person, right? And assessment centers and these sorts of things. So now that we're doing it virtually, we don't call it an in-basket anymore. We call it an inbox, hence the name. Good question. It's foreshadowing. I like it. So here's kind of the broad walkthrough. It's, like I said, it's self-directed. You can kind of see the steps across the screen so students know, participants know exactly what's happening. Once they sign in and click in, they see this, they do a self-assessment. You're looking at the general management version of CapsimInbox here. And these are the 5 key skills that are assessed. Why do we do a self-assessment here for the skills that are assessed? Well, for developmental purposes, we know from decades of research, it's absolutely essential that you get people to sort of think about where they're at right now, and then you give them objective feedback. Because what we know from a lot of research is there's often a gap, and people have to recognize that gap, lest they will not pursue effectively professional development, right? They need to see where the gap is. And oftentimes it's surprising to them because people tend to overrate their competencies, okay? So we get them to self-rate. That'll be then circle back and it'll feed into the feedback reports that they get at the end of the experience. So they self-rate. Then we go along here and it gives them a little bit of an introduction. What the heck is this thing called CapsimInbox?
Well, actually,
Okay. Please go ahead. Is that a question or just a forgot to mute? Okay. I keep getting that. I keep thinking someone's asking a question. It's just I forgot that they're not muted. That's great. So it tells them a little bit about what's going to happen, right? So you can see you're going to take on a role in this version of Inbox. You're assuming a role at a fictional company, and you have to reply to a series of emails and communications that require your input. And it even tells them how well you respond to, prioritize, or dive into these challenges determines your success. So it gives them a little bit of a background of what the purpose is and a sample image. Then we sort of get into more helpful information for them. You know, how do you use this tool? And it'll tell them a little bit more information like, look, it's going to look like a typical communication platform. It's going to look like an email platform. There's a couple small exceptions. It'll have that inbox layout, but rather than typing out responses to the emails, you're going to choose from different options. At least this version's like that. There's no open-ended responses in this version of Inbox. There is a capability to have that if you'd like to. But it tells them that for this particular version. Then there's also tips for success, which are fantastic. So they can click out those tips for success and it gives them information. Right? Make sure you read about what your role is. Make sure you look into the drive, the cloud drive for different kinds of files that might be helpful. And then really think about how you prioritize your time. And there's a short video, 1 to 2 minutes, again, that tells them about this as well, for those who rather watch a video than read, okay? Then after that kind of background information, it leads them into describing the actual scenario. So every inbox sets the stage for an experience. You assume a role, right? In this case, your role is a director of sales and operations, right? Other inboxes, you might assume the role of the general manager of a boutique hotel, right? That's ethical decision making. Or you're a partner at a global consulting firm, right? Whatever it is, it sets the sort of stage, the role you assume when you go into the micro simulation. So here gives a little bit of information about the role and the company, as you can see on screen. The company here in this version of Inbox is called Ubiquitools. They're an Internet of Things company. It talks about the fact that you have 12 direct reports, 7 sales, 4 ops folks. You have an administrative assistant. It tells you whom you report to, the SVP of Sales and Ops, Jennifer Grawl. And you can read a little bit more about the company below, its core values, its current products, and so forth, right? So giving them some background information as they enter into the experience. Again, these things are also available while you're participating too, right? They're in this sort of drive file that you can revisit later on if you need to. So also part of the scenario, after the scenario, they get a chance to practice. This is just to get them familiar with the interface. It'll even tell them, look, take a few minutes to do this walkthrough here, and they'll just have them respond to some sample emails, just so they get a feel for what things look like, right? What is where, essentially, the interface, which I'll show you what the interface looks like right here. So this is the real interface. Again, how you can see how it mimics the real world. It looks like a communication platform, a little bit like Gmail, if you will, or some of our Outlook displays. But what you're looking at here is this is from the general management version of Inbox. And I'll just highlight a couple things here. It probably looks familiar to you because it looks like a typical communication platform. So here you'll have your, excuse me, your email list, right? These are all the emails that are coming in. Okay, and when you click on any given email, there's the reading pane, as you might see, right on the right. If you look over on the left, there are instant messages come in. They also overlay to make it really obvious that one's coming in, so participants don't have to keep focused on that bottom left corner, but that's where they're stored when you minimize them. And then last but not least, there's this cloud drive, right, where all these files are stored that you might need. So here again, as I said, they're provided again with that company information. There's organizational charts. There's all these other documents, right, as well as a video file here that you might need to reference when you're responding to all of these issues that are coming in, okay? You'll notice that the participant's name is piped in. So see how it says, Dear Eric, it has my name up here. So it's piping in the person's name, so it feels a little bit more real. There's a higher fidelity there. As I mentioned earlier, you'll see that there are fixed responses here, right? There's multiple options that you can choose from. There are options in some of these inboxes use open-ended responses. You can design them either way. The upside of an open-ended response is you get a lot of context and a lot of room for people to really explain themselves. As you might imagine, the downside of that is lack of standardization, and someone's got to go in there and grade it, right? So depending on how you're kind of using the tool itself for more instruction or also for assessment and development, right? Okay, so hopefully that gives you a feel for at least what it looks like, the grand scheme of things, how it kind of plays out. And so they go through this inbox, they're responding to emails, to instant messages that are coming in, they're referencing material, trying to make the best decisions. Different kinds of, and so the idea is that all your responses are tapping into whatever the model is. In this case, there's 5 key skills being assessed in this version, right? What are the underlying skills that are being assessed? And as they proceed through this, some of them are timed, but you don't get kicked out. That's most of the versions. You just go through till completion. As they go through and respond to all the different emails, the sort of experience ends, a window pops up and says, thank you for completing the experience. Now you can proceed to your feedback report, right? And you, as the administrator, as the instructor, the trainer, and so forth, you can control if you want that feedback report to be immediately available upon completion, or you can actually delay it. You can set a certain date for it to come open, because you might want everyone to go through it and then you debrief it live, or one of your trainers or instructors debriefs it. And so you can kind of control when you want the feedback report released, which is kind of a nice feature. And so again, the nature of the feedback report will vary quite a bit depending on the version of Inbox, right? Because different inboxes assess different skills. In general, they tend to have 3 to 5 sections though. There's almost, I think every single one has an overall performance, right? Tells you how you performed overall. This one is from general management. And so this has percentile-based scores, because remember, that's an assessment and development version. So it tells about the overall performance. This one also gives a developmental index. So across the different skills, the 5 key skills that were assessed, what was the pattern? What was your profile? Were you highly consistent in your skill proficiency, or were there a lot of peaks and valleys? So it gives a little bit more information there. This one is specific to that index is specific to this version of Inbox. Self-awareness is always assessed in Inbox. This is where it compares the participant's self-rating to how they actually scored. And it gives them an index of self-awareness that ranges from 1 to 6. And then it tells them the nature of that self-awareness. So here that my index was 1. The score reflects how accurately your self-assessments match the objective assessments in CapsimInbox. Higher scores equate to more accurate self-awareness, and then it'll tell them a little bit more information. Your score indicated that you're currently very low in self-awareness accuracy. When you are inaccurate, it's due to underrating yourself. So it'll tell you if it's the tendencies are to underrate or to overrate, right? So it gives them a little bit more information here. So there's numbers, there's graphs, there's piped in descriptions that are customized and so forth. Then the last component that's in all the versions of Inbox is a skill gap graph. And so here it'll actually plot out the self-assessed score, the self-rating with the actual score. And so you can see here, this is my self-assessment. Here's how I actually scored. Here was my self-assessment. Here's how I actually scored. So I thought I was a lot better than I really am in leading skills, right? And so they're color-coded too to help people quickly see, well, how big is a big gap? Right? And so that we're looking at sort of these broad separations in percentiles to help people more quickly interpret the data. Now, there's other kinds of elements to feedback reports that vary across the different versions of Inbox. When you do time management, the time management version later on, you'll get a chance to see that feedback, right? And it'll have some of these elements, but it'll also have some additional elements as well. So quick question from Anita. Thank you. Are all the simulations individually based or some team based? As far as I know, because I haven't used every single version, they're individual based, right? That by design. I know some instructors at my university have tried to do some of these team based, but they're not designed that way. And so it can be kind of clunky because we're kind of sitting around a computer and we have to sort of discuss each one and type in a response. It's possible, but most are designed to be individually taken. Okay, and Matt can correct me later on when he pops in if there are specific versions that are not. But best of my knowledge, I haven't seen one that's supposed to be team-based. About accessibility and those sorts of things, the good news is this platform is now I can't remember the labeling, but it's ADA compliant, right? So it's compliant. Go ahead,
Eric, all of our versions, to answer Anita's questions, all of our versions are WCAG 2.0 ADA compliant. So it follows the AA conformance. So every single version that's available to you follows that.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, that's outside my purview. I'm glad I don't have anything to do with that. I'm glad it's just taken care of. But I have people ask me that a lot, especially administrators too. At universities, very concerned about that. So after you get the report, typically what happens is people are reviewing, they see all these data. Then there's another section that sort of describes these skills again. And individuals can choose a skill that they want to improve upon. And this is the thing that made me initially use the Inbox, right? Because I love the assessment part. I like the customization. I like how objective it is. And I'll show you in a second all the evidence behind this. But for me, as an instructor, as a person who does a lot of corporate leadership development, I wanted something to do more than just give a score, right? I wanted something that would give some developmental recommendations, right? And that's what Inbox does. It provides developmental recommendation, developmental tactics, suggestions, and it walks people through the creation of an individual development plan, an IDP. It's a very, very structured process. So people don't go awry, don't sort of get off the path as they're developing this. And it sort of follows this flow. So say I chose this is the time management version, which assesses 3 key skills, and one of them is arrangement skills. And so say I chose that one to improve because my score is kind of low and it says I have a high developmental need. It'll walk me through this process within the platform where I first have to reflect on that skill, and then I have to set an improvement goal, and then I create an action plan. And so it's really structured. And throughout this, it'll give people prompts. So in the reflect section, it asks you to think of 2 or 3 reasons why this skill is relevant to your career. Think of 2 or 3 situations, whether they be in your job, school, life in general, where the skill comes into play. Why do we do this? We know from tons of research, this is how you prepare people to think about professional development, right? Then it has them set a goal, and it basically asks a bunch of questions, and then it populates a SMART goal. It creates a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. You can see one up here. And then finally, the create a plan is where they outline how they want to actually go about implementing this development plan. And so they can add as many steps as they like. It prompts them to think about resources they'll need, like time, money, support, and so forth. Also provided at that step is evidence-based developmental tactics and suggestions. So at the top, they can see what is suggested. And some of these versions include additional readings, links to those, and so forth, right? So if you're building your own, you could put all kinds of information in there. In a corporate environment, some of the corporate clients even put in other courses that are in their training catalog, right? For people to help develop these kinds of skills. And the idea is they build this, they have ownership over it, and then when they're done, it's right there. It produces a report in PDF form, right? They can refer to, they can share with their instructor, their trainer, their mentor, their sponsor, their manager, and so forth, okay? So that's sort of the participant experience. What do you as an administrator see, as a trainer, as an administrator or professor? This is the dashboard. This is people management is the version of this one that you're looking at. And so this is from one of my courses. I made sure I asked these students if I could show their names and their scores. They said, go ahead, Deerdorf, no big deal. So here it'll show you my overall score for my class or the cohort, or all the people you've put through at one sitting. And it'll show the average scores, at a group level across these different skills. People management also assesses these skills. This version of Inbox not only assesses skills, it also assesses human capital competencies, people management competencies. And you can see the scores here: structuring work, acquiring talent, managing talent, and rewarding performance. And so it'll give you scores by each participant, right? It'll actually show you if they completed the individual development plan as well. And you can download this CSV file and allow you to sort of do more analytics on it, integrate it with other kinds of databases that you have or need in a university environment. You might need this for accreditation purposes. In a corporate environment, you might need this for your competency mapping and these kinds of other information in your performance management system. Are students permitted to take the Inbox a second time? Yes, but it's not free, right? You have to pay for it each time, but there's a discount too. If you use more than one Inbox, there's a cost reduction. I'll leave those questions to Jordan and Matt to answer, because obviously I'm just a professor, I'm a user. So I don't want to give any misinformation. I know one of my courses, I use 3 versions of Inbox, and it's sort of like the first one is $20, the second one is $10, and the third one is $5, I believe, right? Because there's a sort of a price reduction. Good questions. I like these questions. I'll try to answer them along the way, even though I said I wouldn't. I can't help it. They're popping up right in my face. If you use inboxes that have, this is actually relevant to Ant's question. So let's say you have students take an inbox, or participants take an inbox more than once. Let's say it's before and after a program, a training program, a degree program, for example, in university settings when you're using it for accreditation. If they take more than one version of the inbox, you can track it over time as well, right? You can sort of see their different scores over time. Here, there are 2 different versions, but they assess those same 5 skills, so it can track over time. So asking Ann, do I grade the IDP? I do. In my courses, I do. And it's not just pass fail, although I know a lot of other professors that do that. I actually have a rubric that I'm more than happy to share with you if you decide to use these in your courses. What gets measured gets done. And of course, we want some accountability there too. Most people do really well when they turn in the IDP, because it's so structured. The only time where people sort of don't perform well in a classroom environment, in a university environment, is they just do it halfway, and like they get to the action steps and they write like 1 sentence. I will take a course. All right, that's kind of weak. You know what I mean? And so that's usually when people lose points when they're being graded. They're just not giving enough detail, even though I sort of encourage students to do that. Or they write like 2 action steps. Well, that's clearly not going to be enough to improve that skill. These are good questions. Any other questions about the interface or those sorts of things before we kind of talk a little bit more about why this works. I think we're doing well on time. We are. Perfect. Okay, there'll be plenty more opportunities to ask questions as well. So we're continuing with this origin story. So why this thing called an inbox? I already explained why it's called an inbox, right? So the idea here is, what are the kind of its design and empirical foundations? Well, as I alluded to earlier, it's based off this exercise that's in all kinds of assessment centers. Those of you who are not familiar with assessment centers, it's essentially a process that you put people through a series of exercises. For decades, I mean, it started back, the first assessment centers were all the way back to the 1940s and 50s, right? The military used it for candidate assessment. Then AT&T pioneered it for selecting people into higher levels of leadership. So for a long time, assessment centers were used for selection purposes and promotion purposes. But then about, I'd say 25 years ago, there was a turn to also using them for developmental purposes. And so across assessment centers, they usually have 5 to 6 different exercises, but one that is in all, the sine qua non of all assessment centers is what's called an in-basket exercise. It used to be where you'd get a series of paper memos and you'd have to actually work your way through them and respond. And so this harkens back to that kind of tried and true approach of tapping into key skills, right? Because assessment centers tap into skills. The in-basket exercise taps into skills. There's also a borrowing of what is called a situational judgment test. And for those of you who haven't heard of this before, this is also a very, very common validated approach to personnel selection. And so essentially a situational judgment test, it presents a question to somebody, but it presents a scenario, a longer scenario-based question. They use it a lot in medical schools as well. So case-based assessment, scenario-based assessment. And so the idea here is it's not just rote knowledge recognition, but it's applying that knowledge, right? You see the situation, can you diagnose it and demonstrate the successful application of a certain piece of knowledge you're trying to tap into. And so there's both of those elements infused in Inbox, because this is a way that we know that's a very accurate way and a reliable way of tapping into people's ability to apply knowledge in a skillful manner. So again, why these features, as I've alluded to, there's a huge body of evidence to support the validity of these when they're built properly. And again, it taps into knowledge application, not just knowledge acquisition. So when we use end of course exams, or you require certification exams at your corporation, these primarily just tap into knowledge acquisition, which is important. You can't do before you know, right? You got to know, then you do. But we often want to go beyond that, right? We want to make sure they don't just know it, but they can actually demonstrate that knowledge and apply it to more complex situations. And that's what happens in Inbox. In case you don't believe me, here are just a sampling of some of the references that support this. And by the way, I'm not showing you individual studies. These are meta-analyses. So each one of these is a study of studies. So yeah, and this is only just a few. So I'm not really making this up. There's a huge body of evidence here. My background, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, is my training is, my PhD is, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So that's what we do, right? It's part of what we do is we design validated assessments and these sorts of things. So I wouldn't even use a tool if it didn't have any validity, right? So you'll never see me use things like the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, or the DISC, and these other kinds of assessments in any of my classes because they have no validity, right? So don't put something in there that has no evidence of effectiveness, okay? So that's kind of like the evidentiary background. But what about from the sake of what we do as instructors, as trainers, right? As administrators in learning environments, learning professionals. Why should we care about this besides the fact that there's evidence that supports it works? Well, if we think about the way people develop, what we know from decades of research in professional development, career management, and leadership development is that there's kind of a process, right? Where people build some foundational knowledge, whether it's on how to manage people, how to manage money, right? Organizational strategy, whatever that foundational knowledge is, business communication. That develops some self-awareness. What do I know? What do I not know? Hopefully leading some perspective change. I need to really work on these things. And then once you have that in place, then it leads to skill development and hopefully lasting change, especially beyond our courses, right? Our programs. Here's the rub. This involves both knowledge and skill, knowing and doing. What we know from a lot of research is there's a big gap there. The things people learn in our courses, and do they transfer it back to their jobs? For us in universities, what do they acquire from our courses, and can they take it beyond? Can they take it beyond after they graduate and apply it to their careers? In business schools in particular, there's been a lot written about this. There's an enormous knowing doing gap where we're very, very good at inculcating knowledge, not so great at the skilled application of that knowledge. And some of that is just the way we structure our coursework, and the nature of universities have some constraints there. We rely more heavily on passive techniques like lecture, rather than more active techniques such as simulation-based learning and these sorts of things, service-based learning that promote more skilled application. Just to give you an example, this is a study by Tim Baldwin and colleagues from Indiana University, and they were giving people an objective assessment of how well they can of applied management knowledge, right? Applied managerial knowledge. And so they gave this to recent undergrads, MBAs, middle managers, all the way up to executives. But what you're looking at here are all the students, right? And so after they've already finished, right, they've already gotten their degree, the average score on this applied managerial knowledge exam was only 19%. So just think about what that means. They're only able to skillfully apply what they learned about a fifth of the time. We can do better, right? We can certainly do better. In case you're curious, the executives were a little bit better. They were upwards over about a third, right? Their average score was about 35%. So they did a little bit better, but still room to develop, okay? So the idea here is we need to sort of address this in more meaningful ways and try to work within the constraints that we have in a university environment or in a corporate environment when your training programs have to be, much more bounded, micro learning and badging and all kinds of things that a lot of corporations are pursuing. It's more chunk, bite-sized learning. Oh, by the way, to make this even more concerning, I should show you. Not only do people have a difficult time transferring knowledge to skilled application, if you look at large-scale surveys of students, right, it turns out that they're wholly unaware of this too. They're unaware of their lack of preparedness, right? So this is if you look at surveys by the National Association for Colleges Employers, so over 200 plus employers, thousands of students, right, that tap into competencies like professionalism, communication, critical thinking, leadership, teamwork, right? And if you look at the data, students think, oh, I'm totally prepared, right? I'm totally proficient. And employers think not so much, right? So again, why is that? Why do they have a difficult time applying this knowledge in a skillful way? And why do they think they're good at it though, right? Well, one aspect is we may not be giving them the kinds of feedback that they need, because we do know from a lot of research is that to bridge that knowing doing gap, one way of bridging it is giving people actionable feedback, especially if that actionable feedback is based off experiential learning methods, more active learning mechanisms. It's not enough just to find out that I got an 85% on my accounting exam, right? Or I got this question wrong and that question wrong. I need more specific information about, well, why did I get it wrong? What kinds of scenarios does this apply to, right? Can I actually practice it in more complex, more uncertain situations, okay? So what this sort of suggests is that, business as usual really isn't enough for a lot of us, whether we're in a traditional university environment or delivering training out in the industry. Our traditional ways of primarily relying on direct instruction, right? Especially passive methods like lecture and so forth. They're inadequate, right? They get students there. We're really good at inculcating and instilling knowledge, but we're not quite getting our students enough practice, enough skilled application, and enough feedback about those skills to help them bridge that gap, right? Because, doing requires a little bit more than just knowing. And this is where experiential learning can come in to help, right? That's kind of the overall value of this, if that makes sense. Good. Okay. Still doing really well on time. So now that you've been patient and listening to me for a while, we're going to go for a test drive here in a second. Okay. So here's what's interesting. We're going to actually test drive time management, as I alluded to earlier. Why do time management? Well, it's a shorter inbox, doesn't take as long. As you might imagine, it is timed because it's tapping into time management. And there are a lot of different features in time management, right? The way things pop in and out, and the way it looks, that'll give you a good feel for some of the capabilities, the possibilities of these inboxes, if that makes sense. So what I normally do, and what everyone should do, is have some sort of setup. Don't just assign it. Don't just say, hey, this is part of your pre-workshop experience if you're in a corporate environment. Don't just make it an assignment in your class. You should have some sort of setup. Why? Why should you have a setup? Well, we know from a lot of research that this kind of priming mechanisms makes people more motivated to learn. And if they're more motivated to learn, they'll get more out of the experience. More interestingly, there was just a study that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PANAS, right? Just last year, or end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And they examined this long-standing question of why students and faculty in university environments tend to be resistant to using active learning tactics, right? Why is this? We know they work well. Why are people sort of resistant, both faculty and students? And so they did an experimental study, really, really well designed, randomized experiment. And as you might imagine, they found that students that used active learning, like simulations and these sorts of things, learn more, which that's not a surprise. We've known this from a lot of research. But here's what's interesting. When they asked students, how much did you learn? They tended to think that they learned less in the active learning segment. And the idea here, at least part of that, is attributed to the cognitive load, right? It's harder. It takes more effort. It takes more concentration to engage in active learning, like simulations, than it does for me to just stand here, like you're doing now, watching me passively deliver information, which is the way a lot of us do. And so it's kind of interesting if you think about that. They learn more, but they felt like they didn't. So can we address that? And it turns out there's a lot of research that shows if you have a good setup, you prime the experience, you can mitigate that, right? People can get more out of the experience and perceive that they've gained more, okay? So what I'm going to show you now is the actual kickoff that I use when I run time management, right? Whether it's in a corporate environment, which I've used it in a couple leadership development programs, as well as an academic environment, okay? You can roll this out yourself. You can record it, right? You can put it up as a deck that students click through. There's a lot of different ways to deliver this. Just about every version of the inbox has these kinds of support materials for administrators and instructors. So setup decks, debrief decks that you can pull down and then repurpose, or just use verbatim, okay? So I'm going to kind of walk you through this as the way I would normally deliver it, because you're going to do the time management inbox yourself, right? Okay. So it's really important to answer some key questions about this experience you're about to have, right? And so we'll work our way through some really practical questions. The first one is, what is it, right? What is this thing that you have me doing? Well, CapsimInbox is a simulation-based assessment that measures 3 essential skills that research shows are required for effective time management. And it'll also provide you actionable feedback that's critical for your own development. What are these skills? Well, they're awareness skills, arrangement skills, and adaptation skills. Again, key skills that research has shown us that underlie effective time management. And that is what's tapped into in this experience that you'll be doing. Why should you care about time management? Well, if we think about it, time management is a perennial New Year's Eve resolution, isn't it? If you think about it. Be healthier, be more productive, be more organized, lose weight, right? These are things that are in everybody's New Year's resolution list, right? But unfortunately, like so many New Year's resolutions, they end in dissolution. Maybe we stick to it for about a month or 2 months, and then it just kind of fades. It's like me using Duolingo to learn a new language. I went 6 months, and then I just kind of petered out, right? So this is typical. This is what happens a lot of times, especially when it comes around time management. So why should you care about this? Well, one of the key difficulties with improving on time management is that all we do is we look for quick tips, hacks, apps. If I just get a new scheduling software, if I just use reminders more, all of a sudden I'll become better at time management. Well, those apps, those tips, those hacks are great. They could be helpful, but they don't get at the underlying problem, which are your skills, right? Just because I give a bunch of high-end knives to you doesn't mean you're going to be a great chef. You have to know how to use those knives, right? And put ingredients together. So why does this stuff matter, right? Beyond just this is something people want to perennially get better at. Well, there's a lot of research here. There's a couple of reasons. I'll just focus on two. Two reasons why time management skills are important. Well, as skillfully managing time is a highly desired workplace competency. What you're looking at now are large-scale research, large-scale surveys by the IBM Business Institute. Again, if you look to every year, there's new surveys that come out from employers about what are the skills that we want, but people don't have. Time management's always a top 10 skill, always. And you can even see it here demonstrated. Time management actually has increased over the years as being important, right? But it's always in the top 10. So this is definitely something that employers want, that's needed in the workplace to be effective. There's also research that shows the important consequences, right? More important consequences of time management for people who have strong and weaker time management skills. The research shows stronger time management skills, better health and well-being. So not just performance at work, but also other kinds of important outcomes for you. In terms of work, we know that people that have higher time management skills have more satisfaction at work, feel better, higher feelings of being in control of their life, their work, and so forth. And the flip side, weaker time management skills have been linked with greater anxiety and worry, higher stress and strain, the things that end up leading to burnout, right? And lower levels of engagement in the workplace. So clearly, these are broad level reasons of why these things are important, beyond just the fact that you like to include them on your New Year's resolution list. So what should you expect from this experience? And so a lot of this, by the way, I'll step outside my demonstration mode here. A lot of this will be familiar to what you just seen when I was showing you the interface. So I'll go more quickly through this and I won't give you the full-blown explanation, if you will, right? So, I tell the students a little bit, look, what you expect is you're going to assume a role. In the case of time management, you're assuming a role of a freelance designer, right? Why a freelance designer? Because freelance designers, there's a lot of opportunities where you have to juggle different responsibilities, manage your time and scheduling and a lot of different kinds of products, okay? And client relationships and so forth. It's going to give you some information about that role, right? Who are some of your key clients right now? Who do you collaborate with? And what are the kinds of tasks you frequently do? Incidentally, you don't have to know how to be a good designer to participate in this at all. This is just the role that you're assuming, okay? And then I talk about the interface with the students. I say, when you get into this, you're going to see the broad level interface. It's going to look really familiar to you. It's going to look like a typical communication platform where you'll have instant messages. On the left, you'll have a cloud drive that has files you can access. Emails are going to come in, and when you click on an email, it'll open up in that pane where you can read the information and then pick the optimal response. You won't be typing in open-ended answers in this version of the inbox. In time management, you will be choosing optimal answers, okay? And then you'll proceed through this, answering questions, answering emails as they come in, instant messages and so forth. And then as you proceed through this one takes about 20 minutes or so in one sitting. You'll know the assessment is complete because a window will pop up and tell you it's complete, right? And then once you complete the assessment, there's a second part of this inbox that'll happen immediately after when you click complete. It'll ask you to complete a quick exit survey that's going to ask you to respond to a series of questions. Make sure you answer honestly. There are no right or wrong answers. Get in there and just answer truthfully. These will also be given to you, represented in your feedback report that you'll have access to. So that's a little bit of what it'll look like, what it's assessing, why it matters, and what the experience might be. Before you start to do this, a few tips for success. Be mindful of your time, obviously. It's tapping into time management, right? Read and think carefully about your choices. So get out there and do your best, have fun, be engaged, right? The more engaged, the harder you try, the more useful the feedback will be that's given to you, because it'll give you a really good snapshot of your current skill levels. And of course, have fun, right? And do your best. So that's it. That's all the setup is. I think that lasted 6 minutes, right? And so that's a typical setup. You can make it even shorter if you want, right? As I said before, these versions of Inbox have all kinds of administrator resources. They include these kinds of kickoff decks and so forth. I generally pull them down and then kind of repurpose them for my own use and add some more material in there. But you can see what it looks like. A quick setup, quick to the point. The main goal is to provide a short introduction to the participants and build a case for why the experience is important, right? Give them a feel for it. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time. I think we're looking good. Margaret, are we looking good? I think so. So I'm going to go ahead and answer a couple quick questions then, if that makes sense. Okay. What level of classes are you seeing used most appropriate for inbox? So Anne asked about levels in the university. Anita asked, excuse me, about levels in the university. All levels, even high school, right? It's been time management in particular has been deployed at high schools. There's also a version called Student Success, which is really awesome. That's used at a bunch of different levels, undergrad and grad. That taps into these key skills that underlie effective learning in university environments. Let's see what else. Is it run differently for different students? No, it depends on the excuse me, the inboxes are sort of built already. As far as I know, there's not like this inbox is designed for undergrads. This one's designed for graduates. They're designed to be more generalizable, right? So for example, I use the general management version in my MBA courses. I also use it in my undergrad courses. I also use it in executive development, right? There are ways that the data can be parsed out by different populations, obviously, right? So you're not going to put undergrads up against executives, for example, with some of these assessment and development versions. If you use, Marty asked if we use open-ended questions, what would the scoring interface look like? I'll have Matt talk about that later. It does require you going in, you an instructor or somebody else you have going in and reviewing those responses. Matt can talk about that a little bit. Maybe he can even show you a screenshot of what it might look like. I haven't used the open-ended versions, even though I've used like, I don't know, 6 or 7 versions of the inbox in my own work. But I do have some colleagues that use the open-ended one for business law, for example. These are really good questions. So be sure to circle back to that. Matt, are you on the call still? If not, Margaret, can you write that one down? Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. I know we hear you, Nazim. There's not a URL in there. Here you go. So what's going to happen is Margaret just pasted a URL in the chat. No worries. I like the foreshadowing. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to click that URL. It's going to take you to this page. Enter in information, first, last name. You can use a pseudonym if you want. My favorite is Testy Testerson, but you can't use it because it's already taken. Put in your name, then user ID and password. Okay, so let me get my cursor down here. Where is it? There we go. One key thing, those of you who already have a CapSim account because you're a professor or trainer, you'll have to use a different user ID. Okay, so just make one up, John TTT, because train the trainer, whatever it is, right? Use a different user ID, everybody. Okay, then once you do that, another window will pop up, tells you, hey, you don't have to pay anything. You click log in, then it takes you to the typical CapSim page. This is where you enter in that new user ID and that password, your credentials. Right? Easy peasy. Then another window comes up when you log in that helps you begin the assessment. You're essentially going to click this big gray button, right? And that'll begin the scenario for you. Okay. Your responses are confidential. Don't worry, we're not going to pop up the screen with everybody's scores and and tease people about it. Not at all. And your feedback will be immediately available for you. So I encourage you to go in and take it for real, right? Get in there, try really hard. But if you're not up for that, at least go in there and answer a bunch of emails and play around in it, sandbox it for a while. Okay. This one's timed, like I said, so you'll kind of go through it for a while and then it'll time out and say it's complete. And then you can look at your feedback report. And then we'll circle back and actually talk through it, right? And I'll show you what a debrief would really look like of this exercise. So any broad questions there? I think we're pretty clear, right? Okay. So we're going to be hanging out here in case you have some technical difficulties. You actually have all the way until 10:40 to return. Okay, so that should be more than enough time because basically what happens is you're going to hop in there now and then we built in a little bit of time for a break, right? So get in there have your experience, look at the feedback report, take a bio break if you need it, and we'll meet you back here at 10:40. Those of you who are not in Central Time, that's 44 minutes from now. Okay, is everybody clear? All right, have at it, have some fun. Hopefully you feel recharged, maybe a little drained. I will say that the time management, that is a more challenging inbox, right? Especially if you really get into it, because there's a lot of stuff happening, emails popping in and out, IMs, there's a lot of connections between different messages and so forth. So that one can be really, really challenging. Earlier I mentioned this idea of, well, the inbox can be delivered standalone. It doesn't have to have your involvement if you don't want it to. But to improve the experience for people, especially the impact on learning and taking that learning beyond your course and your class, the setup is key. But even more important than just the setup would be a debrief, right? We know from just an enormous amount of research that when people have thorough debriefs after experiential learning or any kind of an assessment, they get more out of it, right? The reactions are more positive. They have a deeper understanding of what they know and what they don't know, and so forth. And then even more importantly, they take with it that learning and apply it back to the job, right? And so this stuff matters. So with that in mind, I'd like to walk you through first what the debrief typically looks like for this version of Inbox. I'll skip over a couple things because it's a repeat of what you've seen in the setup, so make it a little bit more efficient. But I'll give you a feel for what a good debrief looks like. And then at the end, we'll circle back and I'll say, look, notice I did this, this, and that. This should be in all your debriefs, right? And where am I getting that from? From research literature, right? On what kinds of points you need to make to hammer home acceptance of feedback and motivation to improve and to transfer learning to different environments. And again, we'll have questions, time for questions too later on if you see something or you have a question you want to dive deeper into. So typically, I personally like doing debriefs live. I call it all the corporate training I've done. It's like it's easier to do these kinds of things in person for me. I also do this in the academic environment too. Even when I'm running asynchronous courses, I still have a synchronous session that people can come to if they want. And I never just record it and then post it. Just because when you're talking about feedback for developmental purposes, it just goes so much farther when people are there listening to you and can ask questions and things like that. That said, I have a lot of colleagues that just lay down a debrief, a video recording of a debrief and post that. My personal preference is just to have it synchronous. Okay, so if we're talking about this idea of debriefing, of course, we're trying to ensure that the experience has the impact we hope it does, right? And so this is typically the way I deliver a debrief for this version of the inbox. Again, Capsim, for its products, they have these resources already, these base slide decks you can use as part of the administrator resources. Some versions of Inbox have a whole instructor manual that goes with it. Many of them do. They have a lot of additional information, extra exercises, resources, and so forth. Okay, so congratulations on your beginning your path to professional development, right? And so in this quick debrief, I like to cover some really common questions that people often have when they go through this experience. What was assessed? Why should you care? How was my performance determined? How should I interpret this feedback? And what should I do next? And so I won't do this for you again because you just heard it about 45 minutes ago. But here's where I talk again about what was assessed, like I did in the setup. I talk about what a simulation is, what were the key skills, right? Awareness, arrangement, adaptation is a skill focus. I again remind the participants why it's important, right? Recall we talked about in the setup before you began the experience that these are key skills that are highly desired in the world of work. And there's a lot of individual outcomes as well, right? Positive and negative for higher or lower skill levels. And the beauty of it is, I usually make a point here, the beauty of what's assessed in Inbox is that it taps into someone's skills. Why is that important? Skills are malleable. Skills are not ability. Don't call debit or credit, don't call skill and ability, right? They're different attributes of people. And skills are developable, they're malleable, they can be developed, they can change. So there's a lot of return on the investment if you're focusing on the feedback and trying to enact change for professional development. So another question that's common here is how is performance determined? So you assumed, remember, the role of a freelance designer. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that Tony Stark, AKA Iron Man, was a participant and just took the inbox. It was pretty amazing. And also I love the other pseudonym, Delight Garbage, or Garbage Delight. That's pretty good too. Anyway, you assume the role of a freelance designer, requiring you to respond to a variety of requests, problems, information, and they all directly related to effectively managing time. That was the one common element across all the stuff that you were exposed to. Now, remember, in the interface, these problems and situations were presented via email, instant messages. There were shared documents that you had to look into. A couple quick points here. As all of these scenarios are coming in at you, these problems, situations, information, they're designed to elicit time management skills, okay? They're designed to give you a chance to show your current proficiency in these three key time management skills. So a couple quick points here. How you respond to these different situations indicates your current level of proficiency. Now, remember, these are skills. They're developable, right? And the more you put into it and the more careful you were with your responses and these sorts of things, you'll demonstrate higher levels of these skills. Now, often people say, well, how are these skills assessed? Does the way I respond in one email, drive up or tank my score? That's not the way inboxes work. When they're tapping into skills like this, there are multiple emails, multiple instant messages that relate to the same skill. So for example, for awareness, there might be 8 different stimuli, right? 5 emails and 3 text messages that tap into awareness skills, okay? So it's not your answer to any one given email, it's the profile, it's your pattern of responses across these different emails. Another question we often get is, well, is there more than one right answer, right? It varies on the email in this given time management version. Oftentimes most of the answers are neither bad nor good. There's 0 points if you want to think of it that way. They're not demonstrating poor or effective time management. They're just an answer, neither bad nor good. There will be an optimal choice, right, in each one of these scenarios. Sometimes there's more than one effective choice, where one is really optimal and the other is optimal, right? And so you get more points for this response, but you still get points for the other. Every once in a while, there are emails or messages that have negative points, right? Where if you choose this option, it actually pulls down your score. And that's because you're showing really poor levels of skills that actually are inhibiting time management. There's not a whole lot of these in this inbox or in a lot of these skill-based inboxes because design-wise, if you put too many of those negative answers in there, it has some implications for the psychometrics, the accuracy of that skill assessment. So the design is that there are few of those, but they're not overwhelming per se. And as you might imagine too, because it's tapping into time management, there were some emails, some messages in there that were distractors, right? That sort of got you to maybe you got off task to pay attention to it, right? Well, that's showing a lack of time management, right? If you go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, on something that really isn't important. So what do these skills look like if you're performing them highly effectively? Well, if you're engaging in high levels of awareness skill, it's really tapping into how well you recognize the amounts and limits of your time and how realistically you use your time-based resources. So time is finite, right? And so how aware are you of those kinds of constraints? And if you demonstrate that through your responses, that you're aware of the finite nature of time, that you're recognizing how much you have and how much you don't have, and you realistically use that, right? That shows high levels of awareness skill. Arrangement skills are a lot more straightforward. Think scheduling, right? Think organizing, planning, goal setting, scheduling to effectively demonstrate time management. Or do you have an agenda? Are you prioritizing tasks? Are you able to sort of look at what your schedule is and find time accurately to put other kinds of demands in there? And then finally, adaptation skills. These deal with how effectively you monitor your use of time while it's happening, right? So think of adapting to the changing nature, the changing demands on your time. And this deals with avoiding interruptions, carving out protected time, if you will, to get high priority items done so you're not interrupted and distracted and these sorts of things. Because it's really about effectively allocating your attention and time. And so these are the three key skills that the inbox was looking at as you progressed. So let's take a look at some of the examples to give you a little bit more information about how this manifested, how this occurred in the inbox. So here's an example of a message that tapped into awareness skills, okay? So I'm going to step outside my demonstration rule here. So when you're in these versions of debriefs, the one you're seeing here, I've added some additional information so I could give a more thorough debrief. You cannot get the answers from Capsim. That is their secret sauce. That's their intellectual property. They're not going to give you the answers to any emails. But what they do provide are a lot of examples in their instructor resources of similar emails. They might just change a little bit, but it's similar to what people have seen. So what I do is I say, this is similar to an email that you've seen in the inbox. And again, you don't provide the answers because that's their secret sauce. Capsim won't let you do that. But I always tell students, and they will ask, participants will ask, what's the answer to this? And they'll remember vividly some email. I first say, look, if I tell you the answer to that, even if I could, it wouldn't help you. Because that means you're going to have to remember what that email was, what the answer was, what the wrong answers were, and then recognize that out in the real world, that email is a lot like one you saw before, and then try to recall what that answer was. That's a bridge too far. So I always tell people, a way to think about these scenarios is, can you recognize the key issue? And then can you diagnose the situation and then demonstrate what effective time management looks like? And if you look at the patterns of responses, that's where the value is. But you will have people ask you for the right answer. You just kind of have to steer them away from that and say, look, there's often more than one right answer. Okay. So here's an example of an actual, because I'm doing this for a train the trainer, this is an actual email in the inbox that you saw. This one's from Christina Oliveras. And so what I typically do is I read this to the students, and then I prompt questions. I say, what are the key elements here? And you get participants to discuss this. Well, what do you think, if you're looking at this scenario and you're trying to diagnose it, what are some of the key elements of the information that you're getting from Christina? And so I often highlight this idea. Well, she notes that you're really busy. She's asking for you to carve out time in the afternoon tomorrow. And she's recognizing it might be a little bit too early to do this. Okay. And so there's a couple cues here. Well, you probably should open up your schedule to see when you have availability tomorrow. She's also recognizing the idea that you're very, very busy and we don't really need to have this done now. And this taps into time and into awareness skills, because it's really seeing, do you recognize that time is finite? Are you looking at your schedule? She's reminding you're busy. But at the same time, this is something that's important. You can't just delay forever. It's not optimal. And so a good answer here is sort of communicating to Christina that you can't look up the mock-ups tomorrow, but you'll do so as soon as possible, right? And I think this one actually has a couple, or at least one or two negative responses. If you say, yeah, let's go ahead, I'll do this tomorrow morning. Because if you look at your schedule, your morning is packed. There's no time to do this. And it's packed with high priority items as well. So here's another example for awareness skills, right? So this comes from Frank Toth, asking you about next steps for phase 2. So I often will read the entire email to the class or whoever I'm debriefing. I won't do that to you right now. And then I say, well, what do you do? What do you ask Frank to do here, right? Because clearly some of the key elements, as he's telling you about phase 2, he's asking for advice. And the key element is, I realize that you're busy on other projects right now. Phase 2 doesn't begin until later this month, but I have time right now to jumpstart our project planning. Have any thoughts on what to do next, right? And so that's the ask here. And so this is tapping into arrangement skills, because it's about organizing and planning, right? And organizing and planning, to be effective, right, how you have to prioritize things. It can't just be list out everything that needs to be done and that's effective. That's the first step. What are the priority of these things? And more importantly, what are the time demands associated with it? That's the difference between someone who just schedules and someone who schedules highly effectively, right? They put time demands listed to different tasks and they prioritize those tasks, right? Those things that need to be done, if that makes sense. So here there's a lot of responses that we give you an opportunity to show arrangement skills. So you might ask Frank to identify the major tasks first, and then integrate these into a shared project calendar or something like that, so you could see it, because we're working much ahead of time here, far ahead of time. You could also ask him maybe to prioritize the task into a to-do list even before he sends it to you. That's pretty good as well. There's other kinds of things that are neither bad nor good. Maybe you ask him just to estimate the time to complete it, to complete the whole to-do list before you send it. That's neither bad nor good. It's okay. It's not really demonstrating strong skills. You might ask him, well, tell me who's responsible for each task and list it, and then send it to me. Again, neither bad nor good, but not really showing strong arrangement skills, which that key there is list it out and prioritize it, right? One more example here. So of adaptation skills in this case. So many of you probably remember getting a bunch of texts from this guy, Bryce. He just wouldn't leave you alone, right? Kept firing in these messages one after another. I'm preparing our itemized invoices on your Bright Plane project. Can you send me your fee for the 3 wireframes that you built? I can't seem to find it in my records. Then a moment later, oops, sorry, I went the wrong direction. A moment later, also, please send me the amount we're billing the client for the subcontractor we used to build the website shopping cart. Thanks, we need to send this invoice so we can get paid. And a few minutes later, I see we budgeted $1,000 for something related to testing, but I can't confirm. This is like such a typical scenario. When I run this out, last time I ran this was in a corporate environment, was with a bunch of engineers. And it was hilarious. They were just laughing at these emails. They're like, yes, this is so common to what happens when and they're teasing their project leader, right? Their team leader, who's scrambling to sort of close up all of the loose ends and just firing out instant messages over and over and over again without ever checking him or herself. And so the idea here is, though, he's asking you a bunch of different questions, right? And it requires you to deal with interruptions because you're already working through all those other requests and emails and other IMs. And Bryce is peppering in a lot of requests to you. Some of them are important, some of them not so important, or not so urgent, I should say, right? They may be important, but they don't need to be dealt with right this second. And so what's happening here, the way you sort of respond to this, or you give the correct answer by looking this up, or say you're not quite sure right now, we'll figure it out later, or clarifying these kinds of ways you deal with interruptions impacts that adaptation score, right? Because again, adaptation is how you deal with interruptions, how you're sort of prioritizing things and managing your time while it happens. Each of these do require you to look into the drive files and respond with accurate information. If you go in there and respond with inaccurate information, well, you're not handling interruptions very, very well. So hopefully these kinds of examples gave you a feel for the types of scenarios and how they tapped into or linked to these different skills. Again, it's not just any one message, it's a pattern of responses across multiple messages, right? And so speaking of this idea, again, how is performance determined? In addition to the skill scores, this version of the inbox has other data, has other feedback for you. It includes information on 2 indices, 2 indexes, they call it, one around prioritization and one around procrastination, right? So you know these things are really important for time management. And it really tapped into how well you prioritized certain things that were really important and urgent, things you should pay attention to right away. So if your big client came in and emailed and said, look, I need this right away. I need to get a bid for you. It's the timeline is now. I haven't heard from you. That's something that's urgent, that's important, and has time priority. Did you respond to that within a timely fashion? Or did you save that to the very last email that you responded to? Okay. Then there were a lot of other opportunities to procrastinate. People sending you things that really didn't matter. Like, hey, can you check out this new story? Can you look at these logo designs? And if you start clicking it, it just sort of takes you down into a rabbit hole where you procrastinate more and more and more, okay? And so these kinds of indices basically tap into how effectively you emphasize or put first activities that were urgent and important, and procrastinate how well you refrain from, you disengaged, or you were able to self-control being distracted, essentially. And then finally, the feedback you've also received here dealt with what we call time-related tendencies. Now, these aren't skills, but these are patterns of behavior that can facilitate or inhibit your time management skills. And so this version of the inbox actually delivers additional information around these habits you might have, these tendencies that can something you have to sort of force yourself to overcome to develop the skills. In particular, 3 were assessed that come from a lot of research on time management related performance. What we call reliability, proactivity, and polychronicity, which is a fancy way of saying multitasking, right? Polychronicity. And these tapped into your tendencies to be organized, disciplined, dependable, careful, thorough, and precise. Those of you who teach OB classes in business schools will recognize this as conscientiousness, right? Proactivity taps into your tendencies to initiate change, act before being asked, right? To seek to control the environment around you. Do you have those kinds of habits? And then polychronicity, tendencies to engage in 2 or more tasks simultaneously, right? And you think that this is the best way to do things, right? Multitasking. And so these come into play in your feedback report. And speaking of your feedback report, okay, so here, this is where I explain to students what the feedback looks like so they can better interpret it. The report's designed to be self-explanatory, gives you a bunch of information numerically, graphically. This is where I remind students that in this particular inbox, the scores are percentiles. So if you got a 48, that means you scored better than 40% of the database, right? 40% of the hundreds and thousands of people actually that have taken this already, okay? The report has 5 main sections: your overall score, how well you did overall, key indices that we already talked about, like procrastination and prioritization. Here, basically, they're showing you out of the 7 emails that were high priority, how many did you respond to within a certain amount of time, right? Did you respond to quickly? The procrastination score is out of the 7 emails that you should have avoided, how many did you avoid? And then it sort of gives you text information about that. Self-awareness index, I'll explain this to participants. We've already explained that to you. The skill gap, I have already explained that to you earlier in the setup. I would explain that again to participants. And then I'd say, look, those time-related tendencies are also talked about in your feedback report. The interesting thing here is, unlike skills, these tap into those behavioral habits, but they give you a text description of how that relates to developing skills. Does it inhibit or is it a facilitator of your skill development? Things you should be aware of when you're pursuing skill development, right? And so I encourage participants to always look at that very carefully and think about that as they process their feedback. So speaking of processing feedback, how should you interpret this feedback, right? Because we're doing this experience to give you actionable feedback to develop these key skills that are wanted in the workplace, right? And have key individual outcomes for you in your own performance and career progression. So here are some evidence-based tips we know that drive up people productively receiving feedback. 1, encourage you to think deeply about the results. Remember, feedback is for development. All facts are friendly. I'm not grading you based off your scores. So I actually say this to students in the university environment. Your scores don't determine your grade in this version of the inbox. If I'm grading anything, it's the IDP that you turn in afterwards. In corporate environments, I always say, look, if you're using it for developmental purposes, your scores aren't determining a promotion or a raise. These are key skills we're trying to help you improve upon for developmental purposes. Whenever you receive feedback, it's really important to say, what do I own, right? What's my role in it? You try to encourage people to self-manage their change and take ownership over it. If just receiving feedback can move the needle a little bit, but if you want to really move the needle a lot in development, you have to own it. You have to sort of bite into it, process it, think about it. Which also requires checking your assumptions. Try not to be defensive. Keep an open mind. Remember, this is an objective assessment of time management skills, putting you in there in a safe environment, right, for developmental purposes. But you will have some skill shock. And what do I mean by skill shock? I'll talk about it in a second. Often, when we were looking at the skill gap chart, your self ratings were probably higher than the way you assessed. And so we call this skill shock. People are shocked to find this out. But don't worry, you're not alone, right? There's decades of research that show the vast majority of people overrate their ability. This pattern is so consistent that the 2 researchers who started this research, the effect has their last names on it. The Dunning-Kruger effect is what they call it, okay? Virtually no one rates themselves below average. It's rare. It happens, but it's rare, right? And the rub is the least skilled individuals tend to overrate themselves the most. And as I alluded to earlier, this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is what the pattern typically looks like, Okay, so think 50% is the average, and you can sort of see the actual scores are equally bucketed across the quartiles, but the average of the way people see themselves is typically above average, with the largest gap there on that left side, the people who lack the skills the most. And so there will be skill shock. And the idea is you have to just tell yourself, it's human condition. It's a human condition. It happened to me. It happens to everybody else. You have to move beyond that for development. And so it even happens in inbox too. Look, these are scores from time management inbox, right? These are the proportions of people who think they're in the top 25%. This is what it should look like, right? So again, what's the takeaway? First step is to close your self-awareness gap, to look at this information, laugh at yourself a little bit that you thought you were absolutely fantastic and you weren't as great as you thought you were. Then once you move beyond that, you can process that information and move towards development, which leads us to this idea, what should you do next? Well, I encourage you to review your customized feedback report, print it out, bring it with you, have it for future reference. Complete the self-directed IDP builder, the individual development plan builder. It's all built into that application. Print out that personal development plan. And then if I have an associated assignment in my class, this is where I would insert the due dates and what I want them to do. And in corporate environments, this is where we often insert what are the next steps. Meet with their mentor, their sponsor, their manager, their learning professional, and whatever it might be. And so you can kind of see the closeout there. So as you notice, that debrief is a little longer, right? That took me, what, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes to do, because I do a pretty in-depth debrief. If you don't have those examples in there, you can shorten it up quite a bit. But I like talking about those examples and fielding questions and these types of things from participants. Seems to get them to think more deeply about this information. So we covered a lot there and sort of showed you this stuff. Yes, and these debrief slides will be available, right? And again, Capsim provides slide decks for a bunch of their inboxes. Look, if you're using one that I've used before, just email me. I'll send you my deck, right? I'm happy to share what because I usually add to my decks too, some additional information. I'm more than happy to share those. So what do we do? What were you watching? What was happening during that talk? Well, there's the importance of doing a pre-brief, if you will. Again, I want to hammer home, if you do some sort of kickoff or setup that primes the experience, it's going to work a little bit better for you. It's going to hammer home that learning for participants. During your debrief, make sure you build a clear case for why it's relevant to their careers, right? Why it's relevant to the workplace. Why do we do this? Because it increases the utility of the feedback. It increases the buy-in to it if they know this is the stuff that matters. Also discuss a few illustrative scenarios if you can. Why? It builds understanding. But again, I will warn you, after doing this for a long time, even before I used Inbox, I used to use these kinds of exercises. You have to get people to stop focusing on the one right answer. They'll just want it. They'll just want that one right answer. You have to keep going back and saying, look, it's about situational awareness, right? And recognizing the key problem and demonstrating what that skill looks like, okay? And then typically provide an overview of the feedback, right? You saw me do that. What's the feedback report look like? What does it mean? What does it not mean? And then if you can you link to your course objectives? So if you're in a university environment, can you link back to your actual course objectives? Why are we doing this in this class? So in a corporate environment, why are we doing this? How does it relate to the leadership development program or the sort of life cycle that you might have in a corporate environment, right? For training and development. That helps a lot because then students understand, well, why is this professor making me do this? Employees understand, why is this part of the overall learning plan, right? If you can link it back to those kinds of objectives. So Jordan, who was on the call earlier, he often teaches a capstone class for us at DePaul. He teaches a strategy class. And so in that, he uses ethical decision-making, a version of Inbox. And you think, well, ethical decision-making strategy, but he clearly relates it to the idea that all strategy is decision-making. And we usually only think of it in terms of effectiveness, but you also need to think of it in terms of ethicality. And so he clearly links that back, and it makes students better understand why that's embedded in that course. Okay, that was a lot of me talking. Any kind of broad questions here before we shift gears and talk about how to implement this? Just pause for a second here, take a drink of water. Good. Okay, so My last little bit, if you will, that I'll share with you is this idea of implementation, right? And some broad ways to think about implementing it, and then also to actually implement it, right? What are the kinds of examples? And I'll actually give you a few examples that are from the academic environment. Matt will be joining me. I'll hand off to Matt right after this, Matt Shell, and he has even more examples if you're curious about how it's been deployed in corporate environments as well. You can always reach out to me afterwards. And I can also talk about how I've used it in my own leadership development consulting work too. Okay, so flexibility is the word. So when you want to leverage experiential learning, there's so many options. It's important to recognize that each one of these entails some sort of trade-off, right? If you really think about that, the broadest level of trade-off is what we might call fidelity and complexity. So as you move from guest speakers, reflection papers, cases, role plays, as you move down all the way to like internships, right? That's like the closest you think it to real life, right? There's more and more fidelity, more and more realness, but it becomes more complex and often more resource intensive. It's a heck of a lot more difficult to run a service learning project in class, I've done it, than it is to just invite somebody in to give a guest speech, right? Here's the thing. Considering all these options, these are the ones we most often deploy, which probably isn't that surprising, right? Because it's the less resource intense. It requires a lot, not as much effort on our part, if you will. But at the same time, we know these are sporadically deployed because they might require a little bit more effort. They're a little bit more complex. You have to deal with students not necessarily understanding what's going on, or trainees have to embrace that ambiguity. Sometimes it requires more cognitive load, as we talked about before. But again, there's always a trade-off, right? Of how much fidelity, which we know matters, how much complexity, and so forth. This is where simulations kind of strike the balance. This is why over the years, I've really, when I want to leverage experiential learning, I've kind of settled in here, because you get kind of the best of both worlds in a way. There's fidelity, but there's some resource use, but it's not as intensive, right? It allows you to balance out fidelity, complexity, and resource intensity. Now, in implementing these kinds of things, especially simulations, there are some common obstacles, right? And this is the kinds of things that we've heard over the years. I've been doing trainers for a long time. These are the kinds of obstacles that seem to impede faculty from using it, or trainers from using these tools in industry. I don't have any time to include it. There's no time to actively monitor or debrief it. I already got enough going on, right? It's too complicated. I don't want to overwhelm the students, or you know what? It doesn't perfectly align with my course, with my syllabus, or my objectives that I have of the training program. So I figure it might be useful to address some of these, right? So addressing those first three obstacles with CapsimInbox, a micro simulation. Well, no time, I can't to use it, or I can't monitor or debrief it, or it's just too complicated. Well, the good news is we've already talked about micro simulation is bite-sized. It can be totally standalone, right? Or you can have it fully integrated. So there's so much flexibility there that it can address those obstacles. And so I'll give you some course level implementation models, right? There's three broad models from a course level, not a whole program, but a course level. You can do it standalone, self-directed. This is where all the learning responsibilities placed on the participants. You could have self-directed experiences within some sort of associated assignment. This is where most of the responsibilities on participants, but you, the administrator, the instructor, the trainer, bear a little bit. And then finally, it could be a fully integrated experience with an assignment, where the learning responsibility is really shared between the instructors and the participants, right? And there's not one right way here. There's positives and negatives to everything. Life is not just jelly beans and cotton candy, right? So there's always some positives and negatives. So the top, look, there's next to no lift on you as an administrator, as an instructor. It's just self-directed. Maybe, and you can even have things like a recorded kickoff and a recorded debrief if you'd like, right? There's really no lift here, but the downside is potential lower motivation. Students may not fully realize why they should do it. You may not be communicating the value as much, right? It's just a potential trade-off. When you have an assignment attached to it, even though it's still self-directed, so think like a homework assignment, if you deliver the debrief, right, that boosts understanding and ensures the applicability of the learning, the application, because you're having an assignment that they have to actually use that feedback and apply it. So you're ensuring that they do that. The downside here is if it's self-directed and there's not a lot of full integration, there could be some variability in quality of what you actually get on that assignment. right? Because they're still primarily self-directed. Some people might take it really seriously, some people might not. So if you really want to have the most positive impact, and you can do it, and you have the time and flexibility, integrate it even more thoroughly. That optimizes the deep learning and it increases relevance and enhances the perceptions of the utility of it. And downside, though, of course, it requires more of your time and effort. But I just showed you in our short time together, some of this live touch isn't that much, right? I spent 10 minutes on a setup, 15 to 20 on a debrief. That's not exactly that in-depth or that resource intensive, right? But those are different kinds of options. And as you can see, really what fits best for you in the course you're delivering. I'll just quickly give some examples here of what this might look like in an academic environment, just to help you. I won't belabor the point too much. Just want to kind of give you a feel for what this might look like and play out in life. So here's an example of standalone. So an orientation event in an MBA program, a support tool for career services and academics, support office, and then a graduate level business law course, right? And you can see the versions of Inbox that are used at my own university and these different types of venues, right? And so for a I should go back here. So just to give you a couple quick hints here, I'm balancing how much detail to go into. So for example, our career services, they make available two versions of CapsimInbox Student Success and Time Management. It's essentially in a long list of assessments that students could take for career management and career improvement, right? So they're up there. They're completely standalone, right? The students go through the experience and interpret the feedback on their own. In one of our orientation events, we do an escape room version of CapsimInbox. And so you imagine the MBAs are coming in, we've run this virtually, and they go through this standalone assessment just to get them excited, a fun kind of thing to do. We also have a colleague that runs the business law course, and he has a standalone version of business law that he uses. Here, he simply puts students through it and wants them to see how they scored, and then he relates it back to course content. But it's all standalone. He just looks at the scores to see how people are and what they're getting right and what they're getting wrong. So then he can emphasize that more or less in his course. Not really any heavy lift, no assignments attached to it. In all of our OB courses, actually at DePaul University, we require general management. So part of our goal here is to provide developmental feedback in a couple different courses in our MBA program. And so here, every MBA course has to have that assessment, skill-based assessment, and an associated assignment. They have to turn in an individual development plan. So the idea is we're sort of pooling that throughout all the courses. And we also use, in our undergraduate level courses, our ethics course, we incorporate ethical decision-making, right? And an assignment attached to that too, to make sure that's kind of an experience that students have across these courses. For fully integrated learning experience, some other examples here, using Capsim ethical decision-making. So the exercise is used for exposing a topic that's going to be in the actual lecture. So they go through the inbox at the beginning, they get a skill-based feedback on these different ethical decision-making skills, and then there are associated lectures that occur afterwards that the instructor refers back to. Remember, we talked about the importance of identifying stakeholders. Well, here's why. Here's what a stakeholder is. Let's practice this even more, right? And then they also have to do an individual development plan associated with that. In a human capital class that we deliver at DePaul, for example, we capture people management, that version of Inbox, and do it in a pre and post at the beginning of class and at the end of class, with the idea that we can give students feedback to see if they've moved the needle at all on these key human capital competencies that are assessed in that inbox. I use this one because I'm responsible for that class primarily. I use that all the time to allow people to see if they've moved the needle at all from beginning to the end of the course. There's also an assignment attached to that where they have to use that feedback in a broader assignment I call an employability plan. More than happy to share those materials with you for the ones that I use as well, if you're interested. So these are just some examples of how to go through these different kinds of scenarios at the course level, okay? There are also, of course, obstacles that are at a higher level when you're managing a whole program and sort of thinking about where to sort of position some of this material, right? Does it occur earlier in the program, later in the program? Which kinds of courses align most readily with the versions of Inbox that we'd like to incorporate? And again, the good news there is because of the flexibility, there's no one right answer. Capsim, I found personally, has a lot of support in this regard to give you feedback, ideas of where to implement things. Look, they've worked with hundreds and hundreds of institutions. If you're confused about where to leverage these things, there's also a community forums. You can share questions. There's all kinds of support resources that I've used in the past to figure out how best to leverage these different tools and how to place them into different spots. So I'm going to read this question real quick from Anita, because I'm about to finish my time and about to kick it over to Matt. She says, the biggest concern with simulations is getting the scenario in mind and completely understood before starting the work. Is there a case study? Exactly. That perfect. You got it. So this is the setup, right, Anita? When you're using full-blown scenario, that's full-blown simulations, like your classic business simulation, there is a lot of upfront heavy lifting that needs to be done. For example, a strategy sim. Do they even know what the basic strategies are, right? There's a lot of content knowledge that they need to possess before they get in and start figuring out how to even work through the simulation itself, right? And there's a lot of practice rounds of decisions and all kinds of things like that. The good news about the micro simulations, because they're so bite-sized, there doesn't have to be a lot of upfront work at all. In fact, just about all of them are designed to have no upfront work. And that's by design, which doesn't mean, though, that some upfront work won't make the experience more impactful. It certainly will, right? So in some of my classes, I actually do a couple lectures on decision-making, on communication, and these sorts of things, and then have them go through the inbox. I do pre-post, as I just discussed, where I'm directly teaching the information. It all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Are you trying to get like a tabula rasa, a starting point, a level, where are they at right now without instruction, and then go from there? Or are you trying to see the impact of that instruction, and are they able to take that knowledge and apply it successfully? It really depends on your goal. In corporate environments, I've often used these after delivering pre-workshop material, right? So having some pre-workshop readings and these sorts of things, then an inbox, and then our first sort of experience together is debriefing it. Because that way I can really loosen up the corporate folks and say, look, you've read about this, your experience, but yet you're not demonstrating these skills. And that kind of loosens them up a little bit to get ready for the rest of the learning. So again, there's really not a right or wrong way, a single right or wrong way, I should say. There's what works best for what you're trying to accomplish. And the flexibility of the microsim is pretty great, is really valuable. I wouldn't be here talking about it if I didn't find it useful and there wasn't evidence to back it up. Okay, so this leads me to kicking off now, handing off to Matt to talk about this last obstacle. What if I see all these versions that you have? There's like 20 something, I think, but none of them really work for what I want to do in my training program or my course. What am I supposed to do? Well, the good news is, as I alluded to earlier, this thing is a platform, right? It's a software platform. And because of that, you can actually author your own versions, right? You can go in there and build your own versions of this. And that gets to that idea of the perfect alignment, right? If you want something that actually speaks directly to what you want to do in your course or your training program. So, hey, Matt, are you there?
Absolutely, Dr. D.
Perfect. Hey, I ended 1 minute early. I can't believe it. I'm really, so I'm going to use my last 30 seconds to say thank you to everybody. I actually have to run and teach a course. I'll hang around for a few minutes. If you have any additional questions to me, just send them to Margaret and Matt. They'll share them with me. I'll be sure to circle back. If you want some resources because you want to use some of these, please ask me. I'll tell you which ones I've used and I'll send my material. Hopefully you found some good news out of this and some helpful tips. So over to you, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Thanks again, Dr. Deerdorf, and thanks again, Dr. Deerdorf, for everything for today's sessions. And thanks again to you all as well for joining us. As our final session for today, let me go ahead and pull up my screen. We'd like to speak to exactly what Dr. Deerdorf is referring to, the CapsimInbox authoring platform, a web-based platform that allows you to create your very own versions of CapsimInbox that directly assess the skills and competencies that you'd like to assess within your course. Now, in order to demonstrate this, I brought on two of my colleagues today, Wyatt Dans, our manager of experience design, as well as Luke Courtwright, our senior product manager for the CapsimInbox authoring platform. Wyatt, Luke, how you both doing today?
Pretty good, Matt. Thanks for asking.
Splendid.
Fantastic, fantastic. And we thought, what better way to show you what the CapsimInbox authoring platform can do than actually to do a live demonstration. So we're actually going to be reaching out to some of you in the audience. We'd love to get your opinion on what topics or skills we'd like to hit on in this version. And then we'll go ahead and build that in about a 15 to 20 minute time span. But before we get into that, I thought I would give you all a very top level view of what the Inbox authoring platform is, and then go into some use cases to kind of give you an idea of what you can create on this very platform. But essentially, our mantra at Capsim here is, if you can write an email, then you can write a CapsimInbox versions. In fact, a lot of the authors that I've worked with over the past couple of years have been able to make full-fledged simulations in as short as just a few hours' time. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So first things first, what exactly is the CapsimInbox authoring platform? Well, of course, this is going to be a web-based solution that's going to allow you to create your own micro simulations. And virtually everything is going to be customizable here. The interface stays constant, but everything from the scenario to the participant role to the skills or competencies you want to hit on, and of course, down to the email and instant message content that you'd like students to interact with, everything can be created from scratch here. And really, our goal with the Inbox authoring platform is that we want it to be just as intuitive, just as user-friendly as the very Inbox you went through earlier, time management, for example. And then also, we want to make sure that it was very easy to administer, not just from an authoring perspective. That way you can kind of jump in and have this code freestyle solution to build your own simulation, but also from an implementation standpoint. You know, just like the Inbox that you went through today, it's as easy as sending a hyperlink to students to jump directly into your custom version, or we can help you out by doing a quick bulk registration and create all the login credentials for you to then hand out to students. But what's excellent about the platform is that regardless of what you decide to create, you're going to be able to expect the same cohort and individual level data that you saw in a version like time management, for example. And again, all about accessibility here. There's absolutely no development or access cost directly to enter the platform. In fact, we have a kind of an all-in-one solution that gives you access to a variety of the soft skills versions we've already hit on today, plus the platform for hundreds of students. And I'll detail that briefly a little bit later in the presentation. And then the final aspect here is there's an option to publish. You know, a lot of our authors will create their own versions and use them in their institutions, but then they want to take that next step. You know, I think the world can benefit from this. And we at Capsim totally agree. So if you decide to create something on the platform and you'd like to put it out there to the world, we'd be more than happy to work with you to bring it there. But now, before I hand it over to Luke and Wyatt, one final thing I wanted to cover, and that's going to be around use cases. And I know Dr. Deardorff has done a great job of hitting on a lot of the academic use cases, but I also wanted to highlight some of the corporate ones as well. So first things first, on the academic front, we've seen the authoring platform used to create simple, small 5 to 10 minute exercises or knowledge checks, if you will. Perhaps you want to do something at the end of each module of a textbook, for example. You could totally do that. Or, as Dr. Deardorff alluded to with our business law version, you can essentially take live case studies, perhaps ones you've even wrote in the past, and modify them into an experiential learning tool. And this is the case with our business law version, where we work with the professor to turn roughly 4 or 5 of his existing case studies into a full-fledged Inbox version that we now have publicly available. As a third use case, of course, there's the assessment component, hitting on that pre-test, post-test application. That way you can see the empirical longitudinal growth of skills over time. And we also get a lot of requests around this for accreditation or certifying students understand certain knowledge areas. And one of the more recent things we've been working with authors on the academic side is for research purposes, being able to show how student decision-making goes through, all of course de-identified. That way they can use that for their own research. But what about on the corporate side? How are we seeing it used there? Well, that's kind of interesting because we see a lot of overlap from some of the academic use cases, but we're seeing it used in some ways in corporate that we had never thought of when we originally created this. And first things first, that's actually been around selection. We've had a variety of clients that have used this to create essentially, think of them as role previews. a 5-10 minute experience where they can literally portray what a day in the life is like for that given role that they're trying to look at candidates for. They could put the hyperlink right on the application or right on the job listing. That way they can go through it before they even apply for it. And it's kind of mutually beneficial. It shows the individual what that's exactly going to look like if they get the role. And then on the facilitator side, they get to have a little idea of how this person might interact with different situations in the workplace. But by far, I would say the most common use case on the corporate side is to identify skill gaps. This is something that's very top of mind with a lot of the organizations that I talk to, everything down from the individual level all the way up to the institution level, doing these sort of analyses. And in fact, kind of leaning back towards the pre and post test application, we see this done a lot to basically gather inferences about existing L&D programs. So they may do an inbox at the beginning and the end of, say, a 2 to 3 week L&D program. And then they get to look at the cohort level results and say, okay, well, we've got a lot of great content on this particular area. Everybody seems to be responding fairly well with that, but maybe there's this other topic over here where maybe we need to boost the program a little bit. And then just to detail a couple other use cases here, certification has been a big one as well, or compliance, if you will. Say, for instance, an individual goes through an HR training module, and then you want to have a practical application for them to see what they took away from that. Well, you can do that with Inbox. Or say, for example, you have something around process or an internal platform that you want to certify that individuals know how to navigate and understand. Well, you can do that as well. And then, of course, with the percentile data, we get a lot of interest in this for emerging leaders. And then also have consultants that we work with that are trying to bring their training materials, up to the 21st century, and they want to make something that can be easily applicable to a variety of different clients. So more than anything here, just kind of food for thought to give you an idea of how others have used the platform so far, and we're excited to see how you might use it as well. But without further ado, at this point, I'd love to show you exactly what the platform looks like, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleagues, Wyatt and Luke. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As he mentioned, I'm Wyatt, and I'll be joined by my colleague, Luke. I'm going to share my screen here. And as he mentioned, we're going to show off the authoring platform. Our goal here is to build an inbox experience in 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to move pretty fast. So if there are questions or features that you want us to circle back to, hold on to them, and we will definitely do that near the end. I want to make sure my screen is sharing here. Are you seeing what I'm seing here?
Yep, I can see that just fine, Wyatt.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to build an interactive inbox experience in 20 minutes with your help. We want to have you help us pick the industry and skill that we're going to build out. Inbox is dynamic, interactive. We want to make sure that this presentation is too, so we're going to rely on your participation. I want you to think of a colleague that you interact with frequently, say every day, and what is one word you would use to describe that colleague's communication style? Hold on to that for now. I will be calling on that a little bit later, and hopefully we'll inject some of those into the inbox that we build. But before we do that, let's start by choosing the industry that we're going to build out. We're prepared to build out a customer service version or a sales version. So if you would put in the chat either A for customer service or B for sales, let's take a vote and kick off the version that we're going to build. Matt, let me know when you see a consensus.
Absolutely, taking a look now. A lot of A's coming in. I think that was pretty quick. I think we have our answer there. Around 6 or 7 people looking for a customer service version. Wyatt.
Wonderful. We're going to build out a customer service version. And now let's decide what skill we want to measure. Put a 1 in the chat for decision making or a 2 in the chat for communication. So in our customer service version, do we want to measure decision making or communication?
Give everybody a couple more seconds here. It's pretty even, but I think we just got a little bit more towards 1 for decision making, Wyatt.
I guess Matt wanted to see decision making, so he broke the tie. We're going to do a customer service version that measures decision making. Wonderful. Let's start the clock and get that going. Luke, pull up the platform, would you?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just pull up my screen here now, which you should all see.
Yeah, so an inbox starts with naming the version. Luke, what are you going to name this one?
So we determined it was going to be a customer service version. So just for kicks and giggles, I guess we're going to say customer service.
Creative name there. And once you name your version, you enter the platform. And on the left-hand side, you can see some of the structure and options for building. We start with building out the skills. We talked about building out decision-making for this version. So Luke's dropping that in and adding a description. Luke, how are you going to handle that?
Yeah, so this is going to be something where decision-making might mean something different depending on what you're actually building the content out. In this case, we know this is a customer service version. So there's going to be emails people are going to be going through, obviously, in inbox simulation. So a lot of our decision-making is going to be revolving around that. So let's enter a description and say, decision-making in our inbox is focused on prompt replies and making the ideal choice. So something fairly generic there. Of course, more time we would flesh that out a little bit more.
Certainly.
The other thing we want to highlight on this page is going to be our developmental tactic. So this is going to be something when someone goes through an inbox, we do provide them with that individual development plan that was spoken to earlier. So this is going to be our opportunity to go ahead and put in some resources to help with that skill. And that could be a web link, that could be a YouTube video, that can be even referring back to the textbook.
One thing to mention here before you move on, Luke, in a fully fleshed out inbox version, we'd likely measure multiple skills, but in our time constraints, we're just going to focus on one. And after skills, you can move on to the next area, which is scenario. This is where you build out the world that the participant is entering. The pre-inbox context that the participant is going to gather before they go in. What's the character I'm playing? What's the role? What's the environment I'm entering? Luke, what are we?
In this case, we'll utilize that role introduction field. So building a little bit of that character that our participant is assuming. In this case, we're saying this is customer service inbox. So they're going to play the role of a customer support person. They've been on this team for a few years. They know a lot of their colleagues, and there's some important changes in the organization, and we'll need to make some decisions based on that.
One more thing to highlight here, you see that blue text link at the top of the page. You'll see that on a few pages in the platform. You can download, copy and paste materials that have pre-built introductions, skills, characters, things like that, that you can just copy and paste and get ramped up in building much quicker. So please, I encourage you to check those out.
Yeah, and you'll see other fields on this page too. So if you wanted to give more background on the company, let's say, you could utilize this introductory material field as well.
Jumping on to the next section, characters. Luke is going to build out 3 characters for our sample inbox here. And while he's doing that, now is the time I'd like you to participate in the chat. And remember, I asked for the communication style of somebody you communicate with on a regular basis. If you don't mind putting a few examples of one word to describe a communication style of a colleague of yours, we'll try and incorporate that and apply those characteristics to these characters. If people are hesitant to share that, we've got some ready to go as a backup. Matt, seen anything? Oh, I'm not hearing you, Matt.
1 second there. I see the first one we got here is accommodating.
Accommodating, great.
Another good one, indecisive.
Yes.
And then confusing.
Confusing.
Should be interesting.
Well, I'd much rather work with the accommodating colleague than the indecisive or confusing one, but let's apply that to their characters here. Madeline's going to be accommodating. Joni is going to be indecisive, and Dave is going to be our confusing designer. Great. Our next step, we're going to jump right into the inbox area. This is where you build out the emails and instant messages that create your experience. So our first email is going to come from Madeline, and it's going to present a personnel challenge, something that happens in a variety, in almost every industry, right? A conflict with a colleague. In this case, Madeline's reaching out and saying, hey, you were at that dinner at the conference last week. There were key clients there, and I could have sworn I overheard Cameron, a colleague, making some inappropriate comments. What should I do? Madeline says. And so, Luke, what are our options as a participant?
Yeah, in this case, we're establishing that Madeline is a colleague of ours. She's going to be a support representative. That's kind of the same role we're playing. So we've got 3 response options we're going to present to our participant. Option number 1 is going to be recommending that they reach out to Cameron, discuss the matter directly. That's kind of inserting yourself in a situation that you're not even a part of yet. I wouldn't necessarily award credit, let's say, for that as an option. And this is where we can kind of get into the levels of correctness, right? The second response option, we're gathering more information. So we're going to ask if anyone else overheard these comments. There might be more to this story that we just don't know yet. So that's a slightly better response. And with our decision-making still here, we'll start to establish our scale a little bit and award that 1 point. Now, our third option, I would argue, is probably the best one in this case. Recommend that this information get passed along to Cameron's manager. They're in the leadership position here. Again, they might have more information as well. And this really isn't something that we need to be taking on as our own thing to deal with. So I would argue this is an ideal response to this email, and we'll award this 2 points.
Yeah, so what Luke shared there was how to apply points to these options. That means when the participant goes in and chooses one of these in the back end, they're going to be assigned points for their response, measuring their decision making. We talked about Madeline being an accommodating coworker. Why don't we add a tag to the end of that email that says, "Let me know how I can help." That seems very accommodating. "I want to help," says Madeline. So we'll add that there. Great way to show the personality of the different characters that you're interacting with and start to build that real world feel. Our next email, we're going to focus on a strategic decision. So a colleague reaches out and makes a recommendation and asks you to weigh in. In this case, Joni's reaching out and recommending that we check out the CRM software Salesforce. She says that much of the team has used it, and I think it would be pretty much a home run for our team. So in our response option, Luke's building out, you can respond, "Great, let's make the call and switch to Salesforce." Option 2 is, "We've got an investment in our current CRM. Let's ride out our current CRM." And the third one is asking Joni to explain, "Do you have any thoughts on any of the other options from the PDF?" We mentioned a PDF here. And in general, this seems like an email where we need more context to make the correct decision. So Luke, how can we handle that?
Yeah, there's a variety of ways we can use supplemental materials. In this case, we have an actual web link to this PDF that's referred to. And you even see in this email, we're saying, here's a link. So why don't we go ahead and actually use this as a hyperlink? And we'll go ahead and establish that to open in a new window, so as not to take someone away from the interface that we're having them go through. So we'll go ahead and save that off. So when our participant is completing this, they can just click on the link and review that content.
Yeah, great. And you talked about other ways to do that. We've got a drive file where you can attach files to a shared drive area and obviously attachments. We talked about Joni being indecisive. A great way to add indecision to this would be maybe at the end saying, what do you add in there, Luke? Not sure?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but your opinion might be appreciated here.
Yeah, classic. "I'm recommending we do something, but I'm not sure." Let me stand right on the middle of the fence there, Joni. Great. Also, Luke, what are you adding there?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and add a 10-second delay to this email. So there's a little bit of a timing element to an inbox. So in this case, you'll see Madeline's email. We didn't establish any sort of delay to that email. So that's going to be there right as our participants start the exercise. Now, with this 10-second delay, this is saying 10 seconds after my user goes in, that's when this email is going to pop in. So you're going to get emails throughout the day. We're going to try to replicate that a little bit with our own exercise.
Yeah, and speaking of replicating the work environment that we live in every day, let's jump into adding an IM. And when it's most effective to add an IM is to take an interaction that warrants that kind of communication. In this case, our designer is reaching out and saying, "Hey, I've been working on this project. Would you mind giving me some feedback?" That's the kind of IM that we get. Maybe doesn't necessarily warrant an email. It's just like a, "Hey, I'm working on this. Do you have a second to check it out?" Our response options are, "Sure, send it over," or "I'm kind of busy. Maybe you could send it later." Or with IMs, generally, you have the option to ignore them. So we've included that as well. If we click sure, the first response option, that indicates that there'll probably be some follow-up immediately. How are we going to handle that, Luke?
Yeah, so we want to kind of establish that back and forth. There's a little bit of a cause and effect to our answers here. So in the case of selecting sure, we're going to go ahead and add a trigger here in the right-hand pane. And we're going to trigger a new instant message first. And we'll set this from Dave as well. And this is just going to be a quick confirmation saying, "Awesome, I'll send this over to you in a second." Now, He's going to be asking for feedback here. He says he's going to send it over in a second. So there's also going to be a second trigger we're going to add here. And this time it's going to be an email. That email, set this from Dave here. This is just going to be him actually sending over that flyer that he alluded to in that instant message. What should we do
in this case? Add it as an attachment, wouldn't you? So he sent that message. You said, sure, let me see it. He says, I'll send it over. Sends a little message, adds an attachment. Here's the flyer. Luke's adding a file from his desktop, and that'll serve as our reference for the PNG there. Now, in our other examples, we've shown the ability to choose from pre-built options. But in this case, why don't we set up a different response type? Let's do an open text response. How do you do that, Luke?
Yeah, this is a great way of actually having the user go in and actually submit feedback. So rather than the default multiple choice option here, we'll toggle this over to open text. And you'll see we're still able to complete kind of those same settings as before. And we can award some skill points here as well.
Now, when Luke awards skill points to an open text, what that means is he's setting the maximum available points for that response. So after the participant goes through the inbox, the administrator, the instructor will review those open text responses and assign up to 5 points in decision making, depending on how you reply to Dave's message. Okay, so we've set up a few interactions here and we've started to build out our inbox. We're running up on time. Let's check out what we've built and preview it.
Yeah, and this is going to be a way to kind of double check yourself whenever you feel the need. We see our initial email from Madeline.
Can I jump in here, Luke? I'm seeing Madeline here, and I'm seeing Dave send us an IM immediately, and then Joni comes in. I don't know where to start. Why don't we delay Dave's IM so it comes in a little bit later, so we can get started with Madeline, and then get that IM to pop up just a moment later.
I like the sound of that, Wyatt.
So Luke's going in and scheduling a delay to Dave's initial IM. So that allows us to structure the inbox in a more interactive, realistic environment, not overwhelm the user off the bat.
So we'll try to preview that again. We see our Madeline email here. Let's take the optimal decision that we set here. Now 10 seconds later, we're getting this Joni email. We have our link here that's going to open in a new tab that we can use that additional information to answer this with the optimal response. And now we see Dave's instant message.
Let's see what Dave sent over as the concept.
Yeah, so we see our open text response here. We see our kind of rough looking flyer here potentially. So maybe that's feedback we want to provide. So we'll say, hey, Dave, this looks like it was created in Paint.
Every designer loves to hear that. So there you have it. We built out a very micro inbox experience here, but hopefully you can see some of the examples of how you can start to build. And if you fleshed out a few more characters, had some follow-up to the decisions that you made here, how it could start to build out into a complete inbox experience. Luke, anything to add before we open it up to questions?
I don't think so. We are going to be leaving everyone with a few links here at the end that I'm sure we'll talk about.
So we moved through it fast. Is there anything you'd like us to circle back to or questions about the authoring platform before we pass it back to Matt? I'm just catching up on some of these communication styles. Terse, that would have been a fun one to play out, but not seeing any questions. That's okay. We're available to you. We're going to drop a link to a Calendly where you can set up a call with us if you are interested in authoring or want a more thorough walkthrough of the platform. Please put something on our books and we'd love to show it to you. We're also going to share a PDF here that has a bunch of getting started content, some of those copy and paste files, some sample versions and some use cases highlighted on how you can get started into the authoring platform. So thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Wyatt and Luke, for that demonstration of the CapsimInbox authoring platform. I hope that was all interesting to you all as well. First thing I wanted to do was, of course, kind of show you exactly what we've been able to create on that platform. Now, I know Dr. Deardorff alluded to this a bit earlier, but I wanted to kind of take a step back and kind of walk you through just how different of scenarios we've seen created via CapsimInbox. Now, of course, a lot of today's discussion has been on the soft skill centric versions like general management and people management, some of our most popular versions, also ethics and time management as well, things that are applicable regardless of your different career paths. But at the same time, we've had a lot of interest in authors to make more acute versions, more direct versions that are more topical in their focus. So since 2019, we basically had a boom with CapsimInbox where we went from just a few soft skill related versions to well over 18 different versions that we've created as of today. And in fact, this list continues to grow and grow. And just at the beginning of this month, actually, we released CapsimInbox Financial Management. We're a financial consultant having to help some of your largest clients with different mergers and acquisition style questions, and also providing some strategic recommendations as well. But just to kind of take a look at some of the other ones on the right side of the screen here, some of my personal favorites would be ones like business information systems, where you're working at a Target-esque retailer, and then out of the blue, you get hit with a data breach at your store. And you're having to navigate not only the internal process to rectify the situation, but at the same time, handling the PR response as well. Or take, for example, our crisis management version, which is actually split up into 3 modules, 3 sections with different checkpoints. That way students can hop in and hop out of the experience at their leisure. And what's interesting about crisis management is that you can make your crisis management plan and assign your team in phase 1 of the simulation. And you're going to see the repercussions of those decisions as you get into section 2 and section 3 as a variety of different crises that start small and eventually start to envelop into much larger situations. But just a couple others I wanted to make mention of here. Microeconomics, a great kind of more quantitative centric version where you're a consulting company working with a variety of different clients in both the product and service industry. Sports management, so just a step outside of the typical school of business. This is fun because you're actually the general manager at a fictional professional baseball team and you have to navigate a doping scandal. Or something like one of our most complex versions or most immersive versions like strategic marketing, where you take the role of a brand manager at a Patagonia style company, where you do everything from to conduct market research to release products. And then actually Amazon reaches out to you and wants to see if you want to create shoes for them as an unbranded vendor, or do you want to try to build your own brand awareness? So a lot of fun different versions here. And as I mentioned, this list continues to grow. In fact, I'm happy to share with you all just a couple of the versions that we have in development right now. Things like healthcare administration, a version that we'll be releasing just next month. But also other topics like internal controls in regards to auditing, or more international finance related courses, all different areas that we're looking at right now. And now we're even looking at industry specific versions of the ones we have on screen. For instance, we're working on a crisis management version 1 for the airline industry. So just some food for thought in terms of what you can create. But all in all, we're more than happy to give you access to any of these different versions should you like to try them yourself. And in regards to pricing and how it looks like in terms of implementing this at your institution, essentially for as little as $5,000, you can provide access to all of the soft skill versions we have on screen here to hundreds of different students. And at the same time, have full access to the Inbox authoring platform. That way you can create your very own simulations and use them in any way that you'd wish. And what you're basically getting there is you're getting the established, validated versions that Dr. Giordor spoke to earlier, so those 5 again on the left, and then also the full force of the IAP to create any different scenarios that you'd like. And of course, our team is going to be able to help you there every step of the way. Now, if this is something that you're interested in, if you'd like to continue the conversation with us and talk about how we might be able to assist with Inbox at your institution, feel free to just put a yes in the chat, and we'll be happy to go ahead and reach out to you shortly after today's presentation. And with that, I'd like to open up first here to any questions. I know I do have 2 in particular I wanted to speak to that Dr. Giordor informed me of from earlier. One we kind of hit on with corporate deployment, how that's done, and then also to hit on a little bit more on responses. But if you have any questions at all at this time, I'd be more than happy to field those. So give everybody a moment there.
Matt,
First,
I think there was one earlier that said, what are financial issues with using it? And I think they were referring to the IAP.
Financial issues with using it. So in terms of creating quantitative style responses, any clarity I could have on that, I'd be happy to expand upon that. I'll give that individual just a moment there. 2 things I did want to hit on in the meantime was corporate deployment. How does this really work? Well, what's interesting with that is it's, again, as simple as on the academic front. What we do is we can create individualized courses for, say, different departments, or create one generalized course for everybody, and then simply provide a hyperlink for them to register. Or we can go ahead and create those accounts for you, whether it be in a single implementation, or if you want to have, say, a pre and post test setup where they go through it multiple times. So I see here a question, the 5K starting fee is useful, other fees for the program created. So basically what we're trying to do here, Anne, is we want to make sure that we give you a single flat price to give access to everything on the soft skills front. And we do have some additional options that if you did want to add some of the quantitative centric versions, you can add those on there as well. But basically, being able to give access to, just about 250 students at an institution for that $5,000 price, and again, having the Inbox authoring platform included within that. So, happy to take any other questions here as well. One I can field in the meantime is around written responses. How do those exactly work? So we have a couple of our ready-to-use versions that do include written responses, and we're seeing a lot more usage of this feature on the custom front. And to give you a scenario, how would this work in practice? Well, say for instance, just like in time management, maybe you had 2 or 3 key business decisions that you needed to make. Well, at the end of that decision tree, we can have an email that comes in from, say, a fictional supervisor. And what we'll do is they'll pose the question, hey, I understand you made XYZ decision. I would love to understand your rationale behind that. And what's funny about this is when I've seen this implemented with students is they kind of take a step back and like, whoa, I thought that this was just, make a key decision and I'm done. But what this allows you to do is collect some qualitative feedback from the student. What was their rationale? What was their justification for making that key decision? But at the same time, they have full text capability. So you can even get down to the email formatting, their email etiquette. Are they responding to, say, an internal stakeholder like a colleague differently than they are to, say, a potential large client or a vendor, for instance? And what's nice about this is that everybody's able to write those responses. They complete the inbox experience, and then after completion, both the student as well as the professor are able to see those results. And on the professor front, what you're able to do is, number one, provide feedback to the student. But number two, you can assign a separate scoring value on a scale of 0 to 100 if you'd like to assess that separately. So you still get all of the empirical scoring that's built into the inbox simulation. And then after the fact, you can always add some more grading there around those written responses. So any other questions we could field at this time? Any thoughts or ideas of how you might see the use of the inbox authoring platform? Any ideas out there? Any aspiring authors? I always love to hear different ideas that people have from this. Okay. Excellent. Well, we're coming right up on the time for today's webinar. Again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And again, if you would like to contact us, if you'd like to learn more about the CapsimInbox ready-to-use versions or authoring your own, feel free to reach out to us at welcome@capsim.com. We'll be sure to connect with those of you that reached out to us in the chat as well. So thanks again for your time, everybody, and have a great day.